We'll just give them the next 2 minutes. Good morning, Ma. It's great to have you here once again, Ma. Yes,
Morning.
okay, we have Prof here already too.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Carol.
Carol, Prof.
Hello, bless you. So, thanks so much. Yes, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Joe, me need to request for the meeting. I will just start, then I will leave. I have another official assignment.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you. Okay, the meeting. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hey, so we are we are now getting to the hour, so it's time for me to say good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining today once again. I'm sure all of us took lots of notes from last week, and beyond what we wrote down, we also imbibed some skills that naturally seem to just be part of us after listening to the session last week. And this week promises to be interesting. It builds up on what we did last week. And to welcome us and to start, I will be inviting the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation and Development, Professor Akani Akiemi, to welcome our speaker, and then to declare the meeting started. So, Professor, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dimeji. Again, good morning, all. Let me again welcome us to this early morning research workshop coffee. And I hope you are here with your teacup and also with your teaspoon. Again, we have, based on popular requests and popular demand, last week, we listened to Professor Fumilola Olaolorun, who took us through, that aspect of developing quality research question and also linking that to how you move and turning that to your statement of problem. So based on popular demand last week, we requested that we want to have for the next two lectures. We don't know what God can do, maybe more. So this morning we have with us again our erudite scholar, Professor Fumi Olaolorun. As I mentioned last week, Professor Fumi Olaolorun, she's a public health physician by training. The quest for knowledge again made her to enroll for a PhD at the Johns Hopkins University in the US. I think that's why we met first around the year 2008 or 9. So she completed her PhD many years ago, and you saw what she did. She showed just one paper from what she did for her PhD, just to illustrate her points last week. Beyond that, she's a very quiet person, but in terms of issues around women's health, social determinant of health in Africa, I can boldly say that Professor Fumola Lawrence is one of those top scholars, that is shaping issues around research, issues around policy, also issues around capacity strengthening. As I mentioned last week, the last International Population Conference that we had in Nigeria that was hosted in Sokoto, she was the keynote speaker, to come and talk to us around issues, how to link our population to issues around policy and also for government to get it right. So again, it's my singular honor again to invite to the platform Professor Fumilola Olaolorun to take us through our lecture for today. Auntie Fumi, God bless. Thanks. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Prof. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here again. And just to optimize my bandwidth, I will soon be switching off my video, but I just wanted to put it on briefly. Today we'll be continuing our conversation from last week. We talked about research questions and problem statement, and today thinking through those. And today we'll be talking about working through research questions and objectives. So there's an overlap, and I'm sure the organizers did that on purpose for emphasis, but we'll be able to go further than we did last week. So by the end of today's session, I expect that you should be able to identify a general research area that you're interested in. You should be able to write researchable research questions. We talked about what it means for a research question to be researchable, or for a problem statement, for a problem to be researchable last week, and I'll recap briefly. You should be able to convert broad to more specific research questions by the end of today's session, and you should be able to differentiate between research questions and objectives. As a reminder, we talked last week about the fact that good research starts with identifying a research problem, and that research problem needs to be researchable. And when I say your research problem needs to be researchable, I mean it should reflect a gap in knowledge. We talked about different types of gaps, but at the core of all of these gaps is a knowledge gap. There's something we don't know, but we want to know. When we say a research problem is researchable, it means it's relevant, whether it's relevant to the research that you're doing or research in your field. It must be relevant to that, or to practice, or to policy. Perhaps you need to tweak the existing policies, but you need data to back up your suggestions. Or maybe there's no policy in the area and you need data to support the formulation of a policy. Or it could be practice and something needs to change, but you need data to show why it needs to change. A researchable problem should be a problem for which you can collect data on your own as a group, primary data collection, or a problem where you can find existing data, secondary data that you can analyze in order to address that problem. A researchable problem should not be too general. It should not be too broad. At the same time, it should not be too narrow. And it should not be abstract. It should be manageable. So the first example I'd like to work with today is one that I co-authored. This time we're looking at menstruation. As I was introduced, I'm sure you know that my interest is in women and girls, women's health, across the life course, but especially their reproductive health. And so this paper is titled School and Work Absenteeism Due to Menstruation in 3 West African Countries, Findings from PMA 2020 Surveys. I'm sure many of you must have heard about PMA 2020. All right. The first thing you do is to write a research question. And the first thing you do when you want to write a research question is to decide on the topic. I am interested in women's health, but I can't say I'm just going to do research in women's health, because women's health is very broad, starting all the way from menstruation to menopause and everything in between. So I say, okay, as a women's health advocate, I'm really interested in menstrual health. Even that is broad, but it's a good starting point. The next thing I need to do after deciding on the topic is to review the literature around the topic. When I'm reviewing the literature, what I'm looking for right now, because it's just a quick review at this point, I'm focusing on the main ideas. What are the main ideas that other researchers have put forward with respect to menstrual health? What are the arguments in the literature? What are the debates? What are the things that are not quite clear that I would like to use my research to clarify? Remember, we said last week that you don't want to just reinvent the wheel. So in reviewing the literature, we found as a group that women and girls face challenges in managing their menstruation, whether this is at home or at school or at work. And these challenges are varied. They include a lack of access to information, They just don't have enough information. They don't get the information from their parents at home. Many don't get information from their older siblings. Perhaps their information is from people they don't even know, peers, and these days on the internet. So some do not have credible information. They don't have access to credible information. Other challenges that we found in the literature include not having access to menstrual health products, usually because they couldn't afford them. Many young people could not find a safe place to use in order to change their menstrual health products, usually their sanitary towels or toilet roll or whatever they were using. Many young girls could not find a private space, even though if there was a place to use, it was not private. Imagine a school where the doors are spoilt and the windows are wide open in the toilets, and a young lady wants to change her sanitary towel. She would feel very reluctant and very uncomfortable because she doesn't know who's going to pass by the window when she's bending down. And young people like to play pranks. And so this could be a very difficult situation for a young woman. Other challenges we found in the literature include religious and cultural restrictions. There are some cultures and some religions where a lady who is menstruating would not be able to join others in prayer, would not be able to enter the house of worship, would be secluded, even in today's world. And so many of these challenges persist, and we saw these in the literature. But we also found out in the literature that there are consequences, and these consequences include not being able to go to school or not being able to go to work. So we decided to focus on school and work absenteeism. We also found out that there are not enough policies and programs addressing these issues. Now, having understood this from the literature, the next thing we did was to focus on school and work absenteeism. So once you have a general topic and you narrow that topic down, then you go to the literature for just a quick review to see what has been done in that area. You're looking out for knowledge gaps and where your own research can come in to fill part of those gaps. Don't ever think you can fill all of the gaps, even in your entire career. You can always only fill a small portion of the problem because the problems are huge. The next thing we did was to draft a broad overarching research question. And this was our question: what is the extent of women's and girls' self-reported absence from school and work due to menstruation? You remember from the title that the settings were Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Niamey, Niger. And so you can refine your question by including the setting or the context. And so our refined question was then, what is the extent of women's and girls' self-reported absence from school and work due to menstruation in Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Niamey, Niger? You can see how a broad interest in women's health became a more narrow interest in menstrual health and an even more narrow and manageable interest in school and work absenteeism. All right, so then we broke down this broad research question into a set of more specific research questions. The first one was, to what extent do women and girls self-report school and work absenteeism due to menstruation in Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Niamey, Niger? Now, this self-report may or may not be part of the research question and the specific objective. It's a matter of choice and preference, but the advantage of including it is, in my opinion, it makes it more measurable because from the very beginning, your audience or whoever is reading your work knows how you measured school and work absenteeism. They know you didn't go to schools to find out whether girls were absent, and then verify why they were absent. You didn't go to workplaces to find out that information. Self-report already tells us that you're talking only to the individual girls and women. So that's the advantage of including self-report in the research question. It makes it obvious at a glance how you measured that variable. Another way to frame this research question would be, what is the prevalence of school and work absenteeism due to menstruation in Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Niamey, Niger? Same question, just a change in semantics. The second research question was, how does school and work absenteeism differ across social and demographic groups? A way many people would prefer to frame this question would be, what socio-demographic factors are associated with school and work absenteeism due to menstruation in Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Niamey, Niger? And for these two more specific research questions, I gave a different framing so that you can see that there's really no hard and fast rule with respect to how it must be framed. You just need to frame it in a way that is answerable, that is researchable. The third research question that we had is kind of atypical. How well did the PMA 2020 questions perform, and how useful are they for future surveys? So this is more of a qualitative contribution because we just took a critical look at the research questions that PMA 2020 fielded, at the survey questions rather, that PMA 2020 fielded, and we critiqued them so that other people who want to use them would understand what the pros and cons of using those questions were. And that just came up in the discussion. So when we say we have a good research question, what do we mean? First of all, that research question must be researchable. And we've already talked about what we mean by a researchable problem or a researchable research question. Secondly, the research question should be clear and easy to understand. You don't have to look for the researcher to understand what they wrote down. So you need to remember that when your audience, when other people are reading your work, you won't be there to explain yourself. So make sure it's clear and it's easy to understand. Use simple, straightforward English. It should not be too narrow and it should not be too broad. It should be somewhere in between, just right. It shouldn't have a simple yes or no answer. A research question like, do girls in secondary schools in Ile-Ife have good toilets that they can use when they're menstruating? That's not a very good research question because the answer would be yes or no. And many people can even answer before you even go to the field. So you need to frame your research question in such a way that the response is not a simple yes or no, using words like what or how or where. And then a good research question or a set of research questions should go beyond mere description, especially if you're working on a dissertation or a thesis at the master's or PhD level, but even for published papers, you should go beyond just describing a phenomenon to looking at associations between different variables in the research area that you're focusing on. So I want you to use the chat box, and let me try to have it open here so I can see. And I want you to rate the research questions for this particular paper. I want you to ask yourself whether these questions on the screen, I've put them on the right side, are researchable. I want you to ask yourself whether they're clear and easy to understand. Are they too narrow? Are they too broad, or are they just right? Do they have a simple yes or no response? And as a set, Do these research questions go beyond mere description? So I'll just give you 1 minute to look at these research questions. And based on the characteristics I have on the left side of the screen, please give these research questions a score between, let's say, let's just make it a percentage to make it easy. So each of these would be 20%. If it's researchable, you can score between 0 and 20%. Same thing for clear and easy to understand, score between 0 and 20% and add it up and put your total score in the chat box. I don't mind a low score. It's perfectly fine. The paper was published years ago. So please be honest. Read these research questions again and ask yourself the questions on the left side and give the set of research questions a score over 100 in the chat box. I'll give you a moment to do that. Thank you, Mrs. Busari. Waiting for other people. Please read the research questions on the right side of the screen and look at the characteristics on the left side and score the set of 3 research questions over 100. So give them a percentage with respect to these characteristics. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'd like one person who gave it a 50 and one person who gave it an 80 to kindly defend their scores. If you want to. If you don't want to, that's perfectly fine. Please raise your hand if you'd like to defend your score. This is a learning opportunity for everyone. Anyone? Would anyone like to defend their score? Please raise your electronic hand and I'll call on you. Okay, if you don't want to speak, you can also defend your score in the chat box. We'll move on in the interest of time. Okay, so specific objectives should align with your research questions. And in many of our universities, we expect, at least in Nigeria, we expect a mirror image, basically. So if you have research questions, I should be able to align them with your specific objectives. So for this particular study, what we actually published in the paper were specific objectives. And these were our specific objectives: to describe the extent of women's and girls' self-reported school and work absenteeism due to menstruation in 3 countries: Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Niger. We specified Niamey because it was a more localized study in one city. 2, to describe absenteeism across key socio-demographic groups. And 3, through discussion to reflect on the performance of the questions used in the PMA 2020 surveys and highlight considerations for the interpretation of the results and use of similar questions in future surveys. So these were the specific objectives, and I'm sure you can remember from previous slides that they do align with the research questions. Something else that's very important, I'm sure everybody in this virtual space has heard of SMART objectives. So you need to ask yourself whenever you're developing objectives, are the objectives SMART? Sometimes it's hard to write SMART objectives, especially for like a publishable paper, And even for your dissertation and thesis, it's kind of hard to say you are going to do this in a 6-month period. That's the time bound is often the most difficult. Um, and it's hard to frame objectives in such a way that you reflect the resources at your disposal. So whether or not they're achievable is usually at the discretion of the person reading the specific objectives. But you as a researcher, when you're writing them, you need to make sure that at least in your mind and among your research team or among your colleagues who you discuss your research with, all of these characteristics are met. So is your specific objective specific? Usually that is referring to using action words. Identify, compare. Usually you start with to identify, to compare, to describe, to assess. You need an action word. The stronger, the better, to evaluate. Next, you need to ask yourself if it's measurable. Can the person reading your specific objective imagine how you will measure it? Of course, you have an opportunity to describe the measurement under your method section, but even in reading the specific objectives, would it be obvious how you're measuring the variables in your analysis? You need to make it as clear as possible. Is your specific objective achievable? That's given the resources at your disposal. Again, it's difficult to show this in the wording of the specific objective, but depending on your context or the study areas, it might be obvious. For instance, if I'm doing a master's program and I say that I'm looking at school and work absenteeism among girls and women in Nigeria, I would say that that is not achievable for a master's student, unless, of course, they already have access to secondary data. But for primary data collection for a master's program, I do not think that is achievable because of the resources at their disposal, including the time they have for the master's program. The next thing to look at is relevance. Is your research question, are your specific objectives relevant? Relevant to research in the field, relevant to policy, relevant to programs. When you look at some specific objectives, you may say they're not relevant because they're addressing things that everybody already knows. You should find a way to introduce a different angle into the work that you're doing. And then time bound. Again, this is something that's difficult to insert in the wording of the specific objectives. But it's something you must think about, and it should be implied, even though it's not obvious in the wording. So let's take another look at the objectives we've been working with. To describe, these are specific. All right? And there's evidence in the wording that they're measurable. Remember, I said earlier on that including self-reported helps your audience to understand that the information is going to come from the individuals themselves. You're not going to be cross-checking with an attendance register or with something else. Now, are they achievable? Again, this is not directly something you would be able to read in the wording, but given that this is a research study and given the background that I've given you, I believe it can be inferred that these objectives are achievable. Are they relevant? Yes, I believe they're relevant, given what we don't know or what we did not know at that time with respect to this in these particular settings, with respect to school and work absenteeism. We knew about the prevalence of availability. We knew about the availability of menstrual health products, but very little literature was available in these settings related to absenteeism. So at the time that it was written, it was relevant to the research field. Time-bound, that is not reflected in any of these objectives. And because it was research that used secondary data and was not being used for a master's or a PhD program, the issue of time really did not come in. So in this particular case, this last characteristic was not relevant. All right, so now we'll look at a hypothetical example. That was a real example of real research that has been published, and I was part of the study group. So this is completely hypothetical. I did not do a literature review. I just made this up for the purpose of our conversation today. So let's say, because I know this is a mixed group, let's say that I'm interested in education in Nigeria. But that is very broad. There's so many research questions you can ask with respect to education. And so I try to narrow it down. And I say, with respect to education, I wonder how our young boys and girls choose a profession, how they choose a career. And so I take a quick look at the literature, hypothetically now, and I find that children in primary school have an idea of what they want to do when they grow up. But this idea is shaped by their exposure, the occupation of their parents. If the father is a doctor, the mother is a doctor, the odds are high that the child will consider being a doctor. Or maybe the parents want that child to do something else, to be a lawyer, especially because of some characteristics that they've noticed. Sometimes primary school students are influenced by their teachers and what their teachers say. Ah, this boy can argue. This boy can argue. I think you should be a lawyer when you grow up. And when the child hears that so many times, he or she may decide, well, that's not a bad idea. I'll be a lawyer when I grow up. It could be the cartoons they watch or read, the TV shows they watch. It could be some of their favorite cereal boxes and what is depicted on the cover or on the back of the cereal box that influences their decisions in primary school. But as they grow older and they get to secondary school, these same children will have more exposure. Their exposure will go beyond the classroom because they'll have opportunities to mix with peers and friends outside of an educational setting. They'll have seniors that they discuss with. Some of them will belong to social groups and clubs, and many of them will have access to the internet. And so they'll be exposed to things their parents may not have been involved in exposing them to, which gives them opportunities to understand about other possible professional trajectories that they could take. Also, in my hypothetical example, I found that most students want to align with the expectations of people that they respect. And in Nigeria, many parents would want you to be a profession that everybody knows about, would want you to go into a profession that everybody knows about, be a doctor or be a nurse or be a teacher or a lecturer, an engineer, a lawyer, a nutritionist, and so on. Unfortunately, in my hypothetical example, looking at the literature suggested that guidance and counseling teachers are hardly ever present in secondary schools just because of a shortage of individuals who can play this role. And people generally have to find their own role models. It's less formal and official. And so students don't have much guidance when they're trying to make this important life decision, when they're filling out their JAM form. They may do what their friends are doing, fill it the way their friends are filling it out, without giving deep thought to the profession they'd like to pursue, to the career they'd like to pursue. Also, in my hypothetical example, I found that students should receive life stage appropriate formal support and counseling as they move through classes from primary to secondary school, because this has been suggested by many researchers who have published in the area. Again, remember, this is a hypothetical example that's just to help you to create your own example today. So, with this background now, we'll work on sample research questions. And the main broad research question I came up with from this hypothetical example is, what careers do secondary school students in Ile-Ife choose to pursue, and what guides these choices? Pretty broad. And then I've broken them down into 3 specific research questions. What are the patterns of career choices made by secondary school students in Ile-Ife? What sources of information related to career choices do secondary school students in Ile-Ife have access to? What factors are associated with these career choices? So these are 3 specific questions and an overarching broad question for my hypothetical example. So from these research questions, the broad and the specific, I have converted the questions into statements to give me a general and specific objectives. So the general objective is to determine the career choices of secondary school students in Ile-Ife and factors associated with these choices. And again, this hypothetical example was chosen based on the understanding that the audience is mixed. And I just wanted something that everybody could identify with. We've all gone to primary school, we've all gone to secondary school, and some of us would have children in these schools right now. And so I hope that this example helps you to think about your own area of research, because you can relate with this much more than perhaps menstrual health or other things that I am interested in. So for this hypothetical example, here are 3 specific objectives: to determine the patterns of careers chosen by secondary school students in Ile-Ife, to assess the sources of information related to career choices that secondary school students in Ile-Ife have access to, and 3, to determine the factors associated with these career choices. So these are specific objectives derived from the broad objective, and they're statement versions of the research questions that I shared earlier. So that's an example that's hypothetical, but let's take this to another stage and look at a variant of this example. Let's say that I was more interested in a comparative study and that I wanted to look at the difference between students in public secondary schools and students in private secondary schools. So this would affect the framing of my research questions and my objectives. So for this variant that's looking at a comparative study, my broad research question is, what careers do secondary school students in Ile-Ife choose to pursue? What guides these choices? And do these choices differ by school type? And so I've broken this down into 3 more specific research questions. First, what are the patterns of careers chosen by secondary school students in public and private schools in Ile-Ife? Second, what sources of information related to career choices do public and private secondary school students in Ile-Ife have access to? Third, what factors are associated with these career choices in public and private schools in Ile-Ife? So you can see how I've brought in my comparative groups into my research questions, the broad one as well as the more specific ones. Now, converting these research questions into objectives, the general objective would read, to determine careers that public and private secondary school students in Ile-Ife choose to pursue and the factors associated with these choices. The specific objectives would be, as you can see on the screen, first of all, to determine and compare the patterns of careers chosen by secondary school students in public and private schools in Ile-Ife. Second, to assess and compare. Can you see the difference there? Determine and compare, assess and compare, how this differs from the first version of example 2 that I showed you. So to assess and compare the sources of information related to career choices that secondary school students in public and private schools in Ile-Ife have access to. Third, to determine the factors associated with these career choices in public secondary schools. And fourth, to determine the factors associated with these career choices in private secondary schools. Because I'd like to speak authoritatively about factors associated with career choices in public secondary schools versus private secondary schools. And that's why I have them as two separate objectives, which means I would explain in my methods the difference, the different variables that I'm using. And in my results, I'd have a separate table for the factors associated with career choices in public secondary schools and a separate table for factors associated with career choices in private secondary schools. So now that I've given you this background and information, it's your turn to quickly try to create your own research questions and specific objectives. So think of a general research area that you're interested in or that you already work in, and then narrow it down. Remember, I started from women's health, which is very broad, and then to menstrual health, which is still quite broad. And then we narrowed that interest down to school and work absenteeism. Girls missing school because of menstruation, women missing work because of menstruation. So think of your own general research area. It could be something you're already working on, or it could be something new, just so that you can have an opportunity to practice what we've just discussed. Now, in this short time, you don't have an opportunity to go and check the literature, but given what you already know about that area, and it could be hypothetical, are you able to narrow it down even further so that you can come up with a broad research question that you'd like to explore? So please do this. And then I want you to break your broad question into more specific questions, like the three examples that I've shown you. And finally, convert your questions into general and specific objectives. We don't have much time, but I'd like you to just spend 2 or 3 minutes doing this activity on your own. I'll give you just 2 minutes so we can wrap up and have an opportunity for you to ask questions. Okay, I just wanted you to have an opportunity to think about some of the things that we've talked about. I mean, I know that this is probably a mixed group, and there'll be veterans in the group who have written research questions for, I don't know, decades. Maybe they've been in the research field for much longer than me, but just to make it very practical so that those who are not doyens in the field, those who are just starting their research careers, can have an opportunity to actually think through the concepts that we've discussed and apply it to something that is of interest to them. So now I want you to look at what you wrote down as far as you could go. I know that wasn't much time. In reality, you would probably do this over hours and you would need to iterate and go back to it. But just for an opportunity for you to reflect on what you've written, are your questions or your objectives, your research questions or the research objectives that you wrote down, are they smart? Are they specific? Did you use action words? Are they measurable? Is it easy to infer how you will measure the variables that show up in the objectives? Are they achievable? Given the resources at your disposal, even if this is hypothetical, is this something that you can really do? I don't expect a master's student to be able to collect primary data all over Nigeria during the course of their program. Even a PhD student, I don't expect them over the course of their 3 or 4 year program to collect data all over Nigeria, unless they're part of a larger study and they're using secondary data. I really don't think they would have the resources they need. And by resources, it's not just money, even the personnel, the expertise, all of these count, the materials, and time is a resource as well. And then are your questions or objectives relevant? Are they relevant to the research field? Are they relevant to practice in your area? Are they relevant to policies? And are they time bound? Like I said before, this last one is not always relevant, but if you are working in programs, you would definitely need to think about this a lot. For instance, if you're working on immunization, you may want to describe the increase in immunization rate over a period of 6 months following the intervention that you have been involved in instituting. And so including that 6 months already makes it time bound. So please take a look at your objectives and see if they address these. To remind you of something we already mentioned last time, writing research questions, writing specific objectives, is an iterative process. You don't just do it once and say, done and dusted, I've checked that box. No, you have to go over it multiple times. So you draft the questions, you look at the literature, you go back and you refine your questions, look for experts in the field, interact with them, ask them to take a look at your questions for you and to see if they're researchable and if they are relevant to the field. There's no point reinventing the wheel. And then ask yourself, what are my assumptions? What are the assumptions behind these? Interrogate your assumptions, see if they hold water, and then refine your research questions further and or your specific objectives. Talk to more people. Immerse yourself in your research, in your work. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it. And then finish writing your proposal. And again, go back to your research questions and ask yourself, am I telling one story with this proposal? Do my research questions reflect the rest of my proposal? And does my proposal align with my research questions? So it's an iterative process. All right, so what are the next steps? Next week, we'll be talking about drafting your introduction, which includes some of what we've talked about, which I will not repeat, except maybe a quick recap. But then we'll talk about just having your introduction, the first draft of your introduction ready. And we'll also talk about conceptual frameworks next week. Remember that the review of the literature that you did in order to refine your research questions was a quick one. You need to go back and do a more extensive critical review of the literature for your chapter on literature review, the second chapter of your work, if you're doing a master's or a PhD, or for the background section of your paper, if you're publishing a manuscript. And then the next thing you need to do is to think about the most appropriate methods that you will use to answer your research questions, which is beyond the scope of what we'll be talking about today and next week. And then you need to think through potential limitations. And of course, if it's human subjects research, you need to obtain ethical approval. Again, thank you for your kind attention, and I look forward to your questions, either in the chat box or by raising your hand.
Thank you so much, Ma, for this presentation. This is Professor Udu, Director, University Research Office.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Ma. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, can we have questions, please? Questions? Can you raise up your hands? Your electronic hand? If you have questions for us.
Faida,
Okay.
please check YouTube in case there are questions on YouTube. All right. It's important. Let's listen. Let's hear about questions. Use the raise hand icon. You click on react and you click on raise hand. So ask your questions, to be invited to ask your questions live. Thank you. And for those who would like to know, this is also being streamed live on YouTube. So just go to the Central Office of Research OAU on YouTube, and then you'll be able to access the videos for the sessions we have had so far, and you can even get the one at the one we did in the first series. So while we wait for questions, I think we can get reactions. And then I want to invite Professor Grace Ogunlusi, the Director, Intellectual Property and Technology Transfer Office, for her reaction.
Oh, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
The DVC and our facilitator. I want to thank you very much. I'm sorry I joined quite late. Had a little issue to attend to. I just want to join others to appreciate Professor Olorun, if I'm correct, for the presentation. I hope I'll still be able to watch it on the YouTube. And I also saw in the chat that some people posted their own research questions, so very good, and our research topic. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who has participated in today's webinar too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma.
Thank you very much, Ma. Professor Odusa,
Yeah.
we'd like to have your reactions too before we start.
Just like I said before, thank you, Ma. Well, you've taken us through, though these issues might look so simple or so basic, but they are very important in carrying out research, breaking down broader research questions into specific research or questions and objectives. Very, very good, Ma. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And then you have been able to tell us that, look, our good research questions should be researchable, clear, and understandable. Should not be too narrow or broad, just in between. Should not be a simple yes or no. Some people, they don't know some of these little things. and then you'll be able to tell us, and then they should just go beyond mere description. Some people they just describe, mere description, and you have been able to tell us that they should just go beyond mere description. And then you have also told us how to align, our research and our specific objectives with the research questions, so that you don't just go off the radar. Thank you so much, Ma. And I believe that most of the participants this morning, almost 100, we
Over
just
100.
appreciate what you are. Yes, over 100. We appreciate what you have given to us this morning. And then in preparation for next week, maybe a lot of people will just go and then come up with their research questions, and then the objectives from the research questions, and come next week to tell us how successful they have been in doing some of these assignments. Thank you so much. Thanks, ma.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
All right. So there we have it. We should please, as part of our preparation for next week's class on conceptual framework, let's all go and let us practice the activity of today's lecture, and then bring it to that discussion, because I think it all builds up on each other, and then so that we can properly, adequately conceptualize our work, and then create a framework that aids our analysis and even the literature review. So I want to say thank you once again to Professor Fumiola Loro, for leading us on this quite gently, and looks like she held our hands all through the process. I want to say thank you very much, Ma. But then before you go, I want to ask if you have maybe any closing statements before we round off for today. Thank you, Ma.
Yeah, maybe before you round up, maybe before she does. Some people already posted their assignments on the
chat, yes.
chat, and then
Yes, Prof has been responding to them, so.
oh, okay, that's good. Thank you. So you can give a closing something, then remark there.
All right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, just going
Okay,
to.
Prof, Ma.
Yes, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to interact with you all this morning, and I thank you for your kind attention. I'd like to encourage the postgraduate students amongst you to please continue to work on your research questions and objectives. It's an iterative process. That's something I'd like to stress. I can't say that enough because I struggle with my students. They often think they've written their research questions, the supervisor has looked at them, and they're done and dusted. But many times, as you continue to develop your proposal, you go back and you realize you're drifting from your research questions, and you either need to change what you're writing in your proposal or tweak your research questions so that you're telling one story and everything aligns. So please remember, it's an iterative process, and I've tried to describe some of that process, but just keep going back to it and refining it. The more you go back to your research questions and objectives, the better they become. Thank you all very much for your kind attention, and I look forward to interacting with you again next Friday morning.
All right, thank you, everyone. Professor, sir. Help
Yeah,
us
thank you.
back off. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, on behalf of the Central Office of Research, I want to say I want to appreciate you, Ma, and expecting that next week will be more lively, and then than this, and then we will have more participants attending this seminar. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for supporting. Professor Ogulusu, thank you for joining. Thank you. So see you next week.
Thank you, sir.
Very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, ma. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes, ma.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma.
Thank you, ma.
All right, thank you, everyone. See you next week, and bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, ma'am.
Bye.